This is the prosecution of Bryan Kohberger, the mock opening statements of the prosecution versus Mr. Bryan C. Kohberger in the state of Idaho. Ladies and gentlemen of the court, today I will be presenting to you exactly what has us all on duty today. I'm going to tell you exactly what happened on November the 13th, 2022, surrounding the events that took place at 1122 King Road, just outside the college campus of the University of Idaho, where 4 blossoming college students lost their lives because one man decided they didn't deserve to live. He felt as though they were animals. This man had developed an infatuation for an unlucky, unsuspecting beauty, and the assumed rejection would cost her and her friends their futures. He planned this savage action out, and he thought he would leave no trace. After all, he has trained his entire adult life for this and knows exactly what type of things he needs to avoid in order to get away with such violence. He happens to hold a master's degree in criminal justice, and he was currently enrolled in a criminology PhD program at Washington State University, where he studied these exact types of crimes. He also has an undergraduate degree in data forensics, so he should understand any data threats he could face and make sure he stays one step ahead of anybody looking for clues. He covered his entire body, wiped down any tools he would use for the task, left his home on a mission that night, and turned his phone off as to block any location data from ever being discovered. He arrived at the crime scene, but needed a little more time to work up his nerve, or maybe just find the best location to park as to not be seen. We have his car on video, though, when he left his home, before disconnecting his phone, giving us a visual understanding of his vehicle and a baseline to compare to an identical vehicle traveling in the area at the time, which we can see is connected to what happened inside 1122 King Road that morning. He entered the home around 4:12 a.m., snuck in the back sliding glass doors while a DoorDasher delivered food to the front. He silently moved upstairs to the 3rd floor. He goes to the door, expecting to see only Madison Mogan in the room. Instead, he finds her roommate, Kaylee Gonzalez, laying with her. This presents a huge problem for Bryan, as he was hoping to have a moment alone and explain his vengeance and reasoning for this attack. He is aware that others in the home could hear him and trap him in place if the girls made noise, and now the risk was twice as high and twice as hard to control. So he panicked. He began violently stabbing and slashing the 2 sleeping victims before exiting the room, only to be met at the stairs by an unexpected male, Ethan Chapin, boyfriend of Xana Kernodle, another of the girls' roommates and another of Bryan's victims. There would be a huge battle between a monster with a 10-inch K-bar knife and a bloodlust, and an unsuspecting friend and boyfriend attempting to protect those he cared about. Unfortunately, although he put up one hell of a fight, he was eventually overtaken by the man with the blade. Mr. Kohberger then set his sights on the witness trembling in her bedroom. In shock of what just took place before her eyes, she attempted to fight him off, but in the end, she was no match for his incel adrenaline rage. Bryan then hears someone yell out to shut up, and he realizes this is his moment to escape and remain a free man. Before anyone comes out to inspect the noise, he darts for the doors in which he came and has tunnel vision down the hall. Desperate to exit the scene and leave without a trace, Mr. Kohberger reaches the exit and strips off the jumpsuit he wore over his clothes, removed his shoes, and realized he was missing his sheath. He had lost it somewhere in the commotion, but he did not want to risk re-entering and leaving something once his jumpsuit had been taken off. He dashed to his car, put the bag containing any contaminated clothing and tools into the trunk, jumps into the driver's seat, and speeds recklessly away in a mad dash for the stash spot where he could get rid of all the evidence and inspect himself for any injuries he may have sustained. He would then assess the situation as a whole and plot for the most important part of his plan, getting away with it. He then drives in a loop around to his home in Pullman, Washington, where he promptly restores service to his phone as he begins to reach the home around 5 a.m. Mr. Kohberger can't stop thinking about the sole mistake in his perfect plan. That sheath. It's clean, he thought. I wiped it down while wearing gloves. Mr. Kohberger then decides to go back to the scene of the crime around 9 a.m. to assess the scene and find out for sure if he had been spotted or if his actions had been discovered. Indeed, his actions had not been discovered at this time, but much to his surprise, Mr. Kohberger was spotted by another roommate of the home, Dylan Mortensen. Miss Mortensen was not able to positively identify Mr. Kohberger, but she did notice certain features of his face. The reason she couldn't identify more than features is because Mr. Kohberger was dressed in all black, wearing a mask, and walking hurriedly to the exit when she saw him through the crack in her door as she wondered what all the noise was going on outside her room. It was actually Miss Mortensen, who Kohberger had heard earlier as he rushed from the home. Dillon, however, being tired and mildly intoxicated, didn't have any reason to suspect this man had just murdered her friends in the other rooms of the home. She thought this may be just another friend leaving after a fun night, so she went to sleep, only to awake to the horrors of her other friends walking into the home and discovering the massacre that laid before them, being told to call 911 without knowing exactly what had happened, and being in shock, a frozen shock phase once she discovered what was really going on. Later on, police ordered all video recording devices from the homes in the area for that time frame to be inspected, and that's where they found the suspect vehicle, Mr. Kohberger's white Hyundai Elantra. They then knew what they were looking for, but there's many of those cars registered, so it took a little narrowing down. They also had found Bryan's missing sheath for his 10-inch military-style tactical K-bar knife used to commit the crime. They tested the sheath, and they found microscopic DNA cells, but did not possess the technology to get a profile, so they sent it away to a more precise testing location and were able to put together a profile of the DNA sample found on the button snap of the sheath. The one place Mr. Kohberger wasn't precise enough during his wipe down. That DNA sample was run through the database and found no direct match. Mr. Kohberger's car plate was later reported to check when a Washington State campus officer called it in as a response to the BOLO. Police then matched Mr. Kohberger's driver's license photo to the description given by the eyewitness Miss Dillon Mortensen, and this was enough to set up a watch party and see what his daily routine is. They discovered his studies in criminology and his degree in criminal justice, his online polls and contests posted to Reddit where he was trying to reach criminals about their crimes. Police observed that Mr. Kohberger would always wear gloves, even in public places. Not as weird in the COVID era, but still not the norm. They had trouble collecting any sample from trash containing any DNA. At this point, police had to watch Mr. Bryan Kohberger drive across country with his father so he could go home to Pennsylvania for Christmas. He was stopped twice on that trip in Indiana, completely unrelated to his criminal misdeeds in Idaho, yet we were able to obtain body cam footage and see that Mr. Kohberger seems to be on edge while interacting with the police, acting very different than he has in his earlier stops back in Idaho. Police then observed Mr. Kohberger stashing his trash into neighbors' bins and decided to test Kohberger's parents' trash for DNA matches to the DNA found on the sheet. They hit a semi-match. Mr. Kohberger's father was a known relative to the sample. He was the father. This was enough to assemble their probable cause affidavit and bring Kohberger in to get a direct sample from him and access to all his digital data and personal information, which has led us all to be very convinced that the man sitting here today, claiming to be innocent of these charges, is indeed the monster we know him to be. I look forward to going over each individual piece of evidence that completes this picture for you and rid you all of any doubt that Mr. Bryan Christopher Kohberger channeled a jealous, envious rage toward these innocent victims, and he used that rage to inflict extreme damage to their bodies, much more vicious than required to just end their lives. He thought he could pull off a flawless crime. He thought he would outsmart the police. He would outsmart all the people of the community, outsmart the justice system, and get away with a quadruple homicide of barbaric proportions. And today, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to prove that he is wrong. Justice will prevail, and this man will be held accountable for his monstrous actions that morning of November the 13th, 2022, inside the 1122 King Road residence. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to presenting the evidence.